Hi everyone, this is part 2 of the lecture on theories of learning. And we were cut off in the midst of covering our 4 theories of learning. So we already talked about behaviorism, cognitivism, and humanism. And now I'm looking at a socio-cultural perspective. Although cognitive approaches to language acquisition and development still dominate in the field of second language acquisition, many approaches to teaching are informed by a sociocultural perspective. This perspective recognizes how language use and language learning are both situated in and informed by broader social and cultural contexts. That would include the history, societal contexts, issues of social class and social equality, and how they inform the ways that people use language, and also the language learning situation, as you are exploring in your prospectuses. Another aspect of this is the fact that learners will learn and acquire language by actively participating in authentic and meaningful activities. Such as writing a business letter versus collaborative problem solving, or developing a project, or engaging in a job interview. All of those are authentic and meaningful activities. Collaboration is also key in this approach. Interaction with others provides opportunities to use language, negotiate meaning, develop communicative strategies, and more. The zone of proximal development describes the learner's level. It is the level at which they can accomplish something with the help of others in collaboration, but they wouldn't be able to do it individually. So collaboration and interaction are important within this approach. A language socialization perspective examines how language and culture are so interconnected that one cannot learn one without learning the other. We learn about cultural understandings of how to act in particular situations, how to interact appropriately with others, and how to inhabit particular roles and identities through the language that we use. Some examples of socioculturally informed approaches are interactionist theories, which are actually also cognitive, ecological perspectives, in which language use is examined as fitting different purposes, language socialization perspectives on how learners develop both language and culture simultaneously, and Landtof's sociocultural approach, which draws on Vygotsky's theories of development. Another element here, which may be considered somewhat separately, is the role of power and inequality in language learning. So more of a critical approach to TESOL. Who learns what language, for what purpose, and how do power differentials and inequality influence the process? Okay, let's turn to some of these approaches based on these theories of learning. The audiolingual method was based on behavioral theories of learning. So it was designed to create correct pronunciation through oral language practice. Students developed correct language habits by repetitious training. There were a lot of tape recordings and language laboratories, so people would listen to tape recordings and do pattern drills, like drills of specific patterns of language based on carefully ordered grammatical structures. And that was in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, very popular. The role of the teacher was to direct and control students' behavior, provide a model, and reinforce correct responses. Errors were corrected immediately to discourage bad habits. Reading and writing were often delayed until the student had an adequate oral base. And audiolingual instruction did not seem to be a major cause of success. Now, for those of you who have learned other foreign languages here in the U.S. or who learned English abroad, this might seem very familiar to you because this is still being used, even though it's really not recommended. And what we'll talk about this week is how behavioral methods actually work well for some aspects of language learning, but you really have to think about what's your objective, what are you trying to accomplish And when would you use such things as pattern drills and immediate feedback types of things? And when would they not be successful? An example of cognitive methods is more like Krashen's monitor model, or what some people call the natural approach. There was a distinction between acquisition versus learning, acquisition being an unconscious process that occurs when language is used for real communication. And the idea was that we learned language in a certain order, that certain grammar patterns would be learned prior to others, leading to various stages of interlanguage, and that our mind actively employs an editor, which was called the monitor, that scans utterances for accuracy in order to make corrections. The main thing about Krashen's monitor model was to provide comprehensible input. That second language learners are challenged by language that is slightly more complex than they themselves easily understand. So it's the I plus one, input plus one. The input, the language they're exposed to, would be at their level, plus a little more challenging. And the other component of this was the affective filter. The idea that mental and emotional blocks could prevent language acquirers from fully comprehending the input if they weren't comfortable, if their attitude about the language wasn't working. So that would be called a low affective filter. That they need to be relaxed and comfortable and have a positive attitude in order for the input to have its full effect. Humanistic methods would be things like certain process approaches that were really about emphasizing personal expression and creativity. A lot of it emphasized fluency over accuracy, so really just expressing yourself and explaining who you are. The community language learning approach was like that. Students would sit in a circle and talk, and the teacher would translate their utterances until they became comfortable speaking in English. So they would speak in whatever way they felt comfortable. Suggestopedia was all about comfortable environment, having nice art in the background, maybe some music playing, comfortable seating, and various things like that. And finally, sociocultural methods would include things like task-based instruction, learner-centered instruction, anything that's cooperative and collaborative learning, interactive learning, whole language, content-based instruction, and of course communicative language teaching. And more on these approaches will be included in our next lecture. Thank you for listening, and let me know if you have any questions. I want you to think about how all of this applies to what you thought about earlier in the presentation. What kind of role do you see for yourself as a language teacher? What image comes to mind when you think about the process of language learning? And how does it fit with these different theories of learning? Now that you know that there's a range of theories of learning, how would you adapt your instruction to fit with your specific objectives and purposes? Also, look at the article that was assigned for this week on the NEA, and they really talk about how different types of learning objectives can be met with these different styles or ways of learning. So a behaviorist approach might work for certain things, a more humanist approach might work for others. So take a look at that, and one of our activities will be related to that.